I came to the edge of nowhere to be left alone. Just cold air, quiet mornings, and a house too big for one person. Then she knocked, boots wet from snow, fingers red from the cold, and a scent like oranges in winter. She was just the woman who brought my groceries. But the way she looked at me, the way her silence fit against mine, that was the beginning. A kiss in the snow, undressing by firelight, and one unforgettable night before everything changed. If this story stirs something in you, and you want to hear more sensual, slow-burn queer stories, hit the subscribe button. I post daily, and it's just me here, crafting every word, every story for you. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. Then she knocked on my door, smelling like rain and oranges, and everything inside me cracked open. It was late October when I arrived in Northridge. The train dropped me off just past dusk, and the station attendant gave me a look like he hadn't seen a new face in months. Probably hadn't. A blanket of pines surrounded the town, thick and tall, like it was keeping a secret. That suited me fine. After 13 years of lecturing about Dickinson and Baldwin to yawning undergrads, I didn't want to be found. The house was a rental, wood-paneled walls, a cast-iron stove, windows that creaked in the wind. The kind of place where quiet settled on your shoulders like a shawl. I liked it more than I expected. There were no emails from the dean, no department gossip, no papers to grade, just the sound of trees. I set up a simple routine: coffee by 7, a walk by the lake, writing from 10 to 4. I was supposed to be working on a collection of essays, something my publisher had been gently nudging me toward for years. But the pages stayed blank. My mind felt like it was covered in frost. Groceries came on Thursdays. I'd selected the contactless option, more out of habit than fear. Then, one Thursday afternoon, I opened the door to find a woman standing on my porch with 2 brown paper bags in her hands. "Didn't mean to spook you," she said, her voice low and smooth. "You had eggs on your list. Thought I'd better hand them over instead of leaving them to freeze." She wore a navy jacket dusted with sleet. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy braid under a wool hat. There was a hint of citrus when she stepped closer. Maybe hand cream or soap. I hadn't smelled another person in weeks, and it made my head go a little light. "Thanks," I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're right. That was considerate." She shrugged like it was nothing, like she didn't notice the way I clutched the doorframe. "See you next week," she said, then turned and walked back to her truck. Her name was Willa. I found that out 2 Thursdays later, when she noticed the copy of the bell jar peeking out of one of the bags. "Good book," she said. "Heavy, but good." "You read Plath?" I asked. "I read a lot. Helps me sleep." I invited her in for tea that day. She declined, politely, with a small shake of the head, but said she'd think about it next time. And she did. The next Thursday, she stayed. She sat on the edge of the armchair while I poured chamomile into mismatched mugs. She told me she used to be a paramedic in a bigger city. Before things got too loud. That's how she put it. I didn't press. I knew something about noise. Our routine became a kind of rhythm. Thursdays became something I looked forward to, not in a romantic way at first, just human. Someone to talk to. Someone whose voice I could replay in my head during long blank evenings. We started trading books. I gave her Mrs. Dalloway. She gave me Into the Wild. She teased me for my stack of poetry anthologies. I teased her for her crime novels with titles like Cold Lake Secrets and The Winter Widow. She brought me blood oranges one week, and I thought about that smell on her coat for hours after she left. One Thursday in December, the snow came fast and heavy. By the time Willa arrived, the wind was howling, the kind of sound that makes windows shudder. She stepped in without waiting for an invitation. "No way I'm driving back right now," she said. Mind if I stay until it lets up? I nodded, already putting the kettle on. She didn't sit this time. She paced, looking out the window, arms crossed over her chest. Something was off. You okay? I asked. She hesitated. Just reminds me of something. A night call. Years ago. Whiteout conditions. We didn't make it in time. I didn't say anything. I just offered her the mug, then sat down on the couch and patted the cushion beside me. She joined me slowly. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward, just full, like the room had been holding its breath for weeks, waiting for us to sit shoulder to shoulder. She looked over at me, eyes catching the firelight. You're not what I expected out here. What did you expect? Someone running from something. I guess I am, I said. She nodded. Me too. The wind whistled, rattling the door. She glanced at it, then at me, and something shifted. A crack in the dam. I reached for her hand. It was calloused, warm. She let me take it. Outside, the snow thickened, erasing the world. Inside, everything sharpened. When we kissed, it was slow and steady. No rush, no music swells, just the heat of two people who hadn't been touched in far too long. Her lips were dry and soft, and she kissed like someone who thought about it first. Not tentative, just deliberate. I remember thinking that it had been a long time since someone kissed me like they meant it. We pulled apart, foreheads resting together, breath mingling. Still cold? I asked. She smiled, that rare, sideways smile I'd only seen once before. Not anymore. She didn't ask if she could stay the night. And I didn't ask her to leave. We both knew what it meant when neither of us moved. The snow kept falling. We didn't talk much after the kiss. Not because there was nothing to say, but because words felt unnecessary. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of something warm, something tender, something we hadn't dared name yet. I stoked the fire. Willa helped me spread out a spare blanket across the worn couch cushions. Neither of us brought up the bedroom. We sat side by side again, shoulders touching, watching the flames crackle and dance. Outside, the world was a blur of white. Inside, time slowed. She rested her hand on my knee, thumb drawing small circles. I looked over at her and saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Not fear, but something gentler, like she didn't want to break whatever fragile thread we'd just spun between us. So I leaned in. This time, I kissed her first. It was unhurried, the kind of kiss that made the room fade out. She pulled me closer, one hand sliding along the small of my back, her touch steady, careful. I could feel her breathing change against my cheek. My heart thudded like it hadn't in years. When she asked quietly, "Can I?" Her voice raspier now, lower. I answered by slipping my fingers into hers and guiding her toward the bedroom. We undressed each other slowly, like we were reading each line of a poem aloud. There was no rush. She peeled off my sweater, pausing to kiss my shoulder. Her fingertips brushed my spine with a patience that made me ache. I traced the lines of her collarbone, the faded scar on her side. I didn't ask where it came from. It didn't matter. She was here now. We moved like two people who'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, rediscovering it, breath by breath. The room was lit only by firelight, which threw long shadows across the walls. The air smelled like pine, and something sweeter. Oranges, maybe, or the skin behind her ear. I couldn't tell anymore where the scent came from or where I ended and she began. We didn't speak. Only the soft rustle of sheets, the hush of skin on skin. There was a tenderness in how she held me, as if the act itself was a conversation, not loud or boastful, but full of care. She asked permission with her eyes, with her hands. Every movement said, You don't have to be anything but here. I let go in pieces. First my worry, then the weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. Her breath was warm against my neck, her body solid and safe beside mine. We moved together slowly, quietly, like snow melting under morning sun. Afterward, she wrapped her arms around me from behind, her chin resting on my shoulder. I felt her lips press into my skin, not demanding, not marking, just staying. The fire had died down to embers. I didn't want to get up and feed it. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded. "Yeah, are you?" A pause. Then, "Yeah." She kissed my shoulder again, and we lay like that for a long time. I listened to the wind outside, the ticking of the old radiator, and the rhythm of her breathing as it slowed. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I woke to find her still beside me, hand tucked under her cheek. She looked younger in sleep, softer. I resisted the urge to trace the line of her jaw with my fingers. Instead, I turned onto my back and stared at the ceiling, heart full and aching all at once. This was never supposed to happen. But now that it had, I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. She never said stay. I never said come with me. We just had the night. And for once, the night was enough. Spring came late in Northridge. Snow still clung to the edges of the road in April, but the birds had started to return. You could hear them in the early hours, calling out over half-frozen ground. The town had started to thaw, and so had I. My time was almost up. I'd been there 10 months. The contract was ending, the publisher had been checking in again, and campus wanted me back for fall. I hadn't made a decision yet. I hadn't even packed. I was stalling. Everyone knew it, including Willa. We never talked about us. It wasn't that kind of story. What we had was quieter than that. A string of shared Thursdays, stolen afternoons, a slow, unfolding trust. We'd built something between firewood stacks and folded sheets, book exchanges, and late-night drives. And now it was ending. I think we both felt it before we said anything. The way she lingered at the porch longer. The way I started to watch the calendar more closely. It had become a kind of countdown, and we knew it. The night before my planned departure, she showed up unannounced. She wasn't in uniform, no grocery bags, no clipboard, just jeans, a worn jacket, and the same dark braid. Her eyes met mine at the door, and I stepped aside without a word. "I figured you wouldn't sleep much tonight," she said, setting her keys on the table. "You figured right." She stood there for a second, like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands. Then she looked around the room. The empty bookshelf, the suitcase half-zipped near the stairs. "Looks like it's really happening." "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad you came here." "Me too." Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just full of things we weren't ready to say out loud. "I'm not great with goodbyes," she said after a while. "Then don't say it yet." We stood like that, a few feet apart, breathing in the space between us. And then she crossed it. The kiss was different this time, not tentative, not new. It held memory, weight, a kind of quiet hunger. Like we were trying to memorize each other in case the feeling slipped away later. Her hands slid to my waist, and I pulled her close. We moved to the bedroom without a word. It didn't feel like an ending. Not yet. We undressed slowly, again. Familiar now. Her touch felt both known and needed. She held me like someone holding on to the last few seconds of a dream they didn't want to wake from. There was more urgency this time, but no roughness. Just heat and closeness, and the kind of aching you feel in your chest when you want time to stop. She kissed along my shoulder, down the length of my back, until I turned to face her and kissed her like I'd never get the chance again, which of course, I wouldn't. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, facing each other, her fingers tracing the inside of my wrist. I watched her like I was trying to photograph the moment, her mouth just slightly parted, her eyes soft but tired. She always looked a little tired. "Do you ever think about leaving?" I asked. She exhaled through her nose. "I used to, not anymore." "Why not?" She shrugged. "I guess I found peace here. That's not something you find twice." I nodded. I understood. I hadn't come here looking for love. I hadn't even come looking for peace. But somehow, I'd found both, if only briefly. She stayed until just before sunrise, got dressed without turning on the light. I sat on the edge of the bed in one of her flannel shirts and watched her pull her braid over her shoulder. She turned to me at the door. "No promises, right?" "No promises." Her lips brushed my cheek one last time. Then she was gone. I left Northridge 2 days later. The train pulled away slowly, like even it didn't want to leave. I looked out at the blur of pines, the flicker of lake in the distance, and felt the kind of ache you don't talk about in polite company. We didn't text. We didn't write. That was the unspoken rule. But sometimes, when I walk into a bookstore and catch the faint smell of citrus, or when snow starts falling out of nowhere in November, I think of her. I remember the quiet nights, the firelight, the way she looked at me like I was something she didn't want to forget. And for all the stories I've told since, hers is the one I carry the closest. No promises, just a chapter. A beautiful, burning chapter.